First of all, thank you for creating Angular 2 and all the tools that are connected to it. I think we're all interested in the future, and my question is, what will come next? What can we expect in the future from Angular? What will be the next trending topic?
That's you, by the way.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize it started. What was the question?
Well, it's technically not 30, but...
It is, sorry.
What's the future of Angular? What's coming next? What's next?
The next is, what are we on? 2.1? 2.2 is next.
Oh yeah, 3.0.
And then 3.0, 3.1, 3.3, and so on.
Angular 5 is gonna blow your mind.
I'm gonna have Angular 98.
Yeah. You should use years, yes.
So what's coming next is there's going to be a lot of work done to both make the output code smaller and faster. I think we already have some pretty amazing numbers, but I think there is space to improve. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to focus also on developer productivity, make sure we improve the kind of error messages you get and so on. And of course features such as animations, command CLI, and so on.
No one. I have a question from the internet also. Okay, pick one from Twitter. Oh, there's one. So please get in line here if you have questions. Where there is the red shirts guy, please don't hesitate to get.
So my question, which is perhaps a bit
Don't be shy.
is: will you be reaching out to Stack Overflow to ask them to delete all answers relating to betas and alphas of Angular, because they are massively unhelpful now?
Was there a question? It looks like a statement to me.
Yeah,
I think it was a no question mark on the end.
Okay, anyone has a real question, please?
Should I repeat the previous one?
Well, you should downvote.
Can we delete stuff off Stack Overflow? Is that even possible?
We could at least find every question that mentions RC6 or something and just post no, don't, no. Oh no.
Should we tag them?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I asked a question to Alex already, but it would be interesting to listen to the father of Angular. You showed us how you implemented the loop unrolling such that it's faster, and because of the context awareness for virtual machine now to operate in Angular 2. But it looks like you are somewhat running in parallel to virtual machine. So V8 does optimizations, you do optimizations for Angular 2. How you're making sure that you are actually not running in the opposite direction? Maybe you just need to let all the optimizations to be done on the virtual machine side, or where exactly the border between these two lies for you?
So it's a kind of a continuous process, right? You first of all get lots of tooling, like bench press to give you visibility of what's going on, and you make sure you run it across different browsers. And you're right that over time browsers, VMs get kind of smarter about the way they optimize things, and they get new algorithms, etc. But it's a kind of a back and forth. Like we do talk to VM vendors, and we do understand what kind of the limits are and how you could and couldn't optimize. So for example, the example I was giving with inline caching, like I'm not creative enough, but like I can't imagine how a VM could possibly cache that particular value. So there are limits to the kind of optimizations VMs can do, and so it is helpful when we generate code that's more idiomatic to what a developer would have written. And as a result, VMs are more likely to optimize idiomatic code.
Hi. I saw an example at the conference about NG upgrade, and it seemed to indicate that you needed to know your dependency tree up front and import everything for the bootstrapping process. If you have a large application where everything's quite modular, and you're already lazy loading, say through System.js. Is that on the roadmap for NG Upgrade to kind of support dynamic downloading and registering?
So we actually just added new features to NG Upgrade, and so now we can actually run Angular in Angular 2 with AOT with NG Upgrade, and that is more consistent with the way the rest of the application works. And so you should be able to now do lazy loading with AOT. You shouldn't have to have these kinds of restrictions where you have to list everything ahead of time.
And just a quick one. So with the lazy loading, is it always tied to the router, or could you just, like you can with System.js, import a vanilla JavaScript file and register?
Right. So keep in mind that router has no special privileges. Like there isn't like router isn't in some way special and it can do certain things that the rest of the system cannot do. So whatever router can do, any piece of application can do. One just has to get a hold of the module. From there, you can get a hold of the component factory, and you can dynamically load the component factory anywhere you want in the application. This is exactly what the router does internally. So it's quite straightforward for you to do that as well.
The only special thing to note is that on the module, there's something called entry components, and that identifies the components that could be lazy loaded. That's the entry into that component set. So when you do have modules that are loaded, lazy loaded, please put the stuff into entry components.
I have a question from Twitter. He said, Rob said that it's not always necessary to manage and subscribe RxJS subscription manually. Do you have any further guidelines about this?
Where's Rob? Oh.
So just, it was guidelines about unsubscribing manually?
Yeah, but you said that it's not necessary to unsubscribe or manage RxJS subscription manually.
So the short answer is it depends. Stuff like the router, right, where the router, like the activated route is only specific to that component, so when that component is destroyed, then all the observables relevant to that would be destroyed. Stuff you're creating manually, if you're using NGRX store, et cetera, those you do need to manage. The best thing to do is use the async pipe, because that handles it for you automatically. The other thing that's kind of a good pattern to think about is that if you're using observables inside of your components, your goal should sort of be to get to a point where you're combining them in such a way that you have effectively one subscription at the end, right? So the idea would be to build a view model out of all these observables, end up with a single kind of view state, and then that's one observable that you can just subscribe to once and unsubscribe to once as well. So in general, and I think Ben Lesh did a really good blog post called something like Stop Subscribing So Much, that talks a lot about patterns and kind of how to think about combining these observables together. But your basic goal should be like, if you're calling subscribe multiple times, and especially if you're calling nested subscribes, you're probably doing something not optimal, and you should look at combining, merging all these different Rx operators to allow you to kind of combine everything down to a single observable.
Okay. I have another question. There's no one else here that wants to ask questions. Seriously, it's your chance.
Can I ask one to Matthias about the animations and especially about the layout? You showed that you already have DSL, you have layout done in a way that CSS is not that much involved, it's mainly code constraints. Do you plan to add auto layout like iOS does in Xcode?
So that is not necessarily exactly what we want, but we're trying to explore things like that to make more of layout adaptation to be more fluid with Angular. It is a long-term project. It is a lot of stuff that we have to get out of the way to solve it first. But if we're making such a sophisticated animation system, there's no reason not to have those effects be available on the layout side. Now, something as complex as auto layout in iOS. iOS has the benefit that it is its own ecosystem. It does know everything when it comes to changing the layout. And if you think about Angular, it's a platform that understands when layout effects change. It understands the ins and outs of the styling and the CSS. So slowly we'll be adding features that allow us to tap into layout effects as well over time.
One clarification, do you plan to have the constraints somewhere there, or
Well, if you think about the @ symbols, the @ animation name and so on, that is the slight seeds for constraints. We're not telling exactly how to lay out the page. We're more or less providing anchor tags that tell us that these things are responsible for some layout effects. We are trying to see if we can have a layout system that's based on that, but not that complicated to where it has constraints yet. And keep in mind, we do have a CSS parser, so we could derive a lot of information from CSS for this.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, is there a way to get auto prefixer or some add-ons, like custom add-ons to put in the Angular CLI in the current version? Or
not currently. We have a few issues, notably about auto prefixer. We're actually considering maybe adding an option or something like that to have auto prefixer or making it the default, but not currently.
okay, thanks.
Hello. So first of all, thanks for being here and giving us a big picture about Angular 2. That was very interesting for me these 2 days. My question is more specifically about the dev tools, because I do agree that it's a key selling point for Angular 2. So specifically, I would be interested in knowing in which time frame do you see dev time feedback on the template validation feature that you showed this afternoon, like not waiting for the compile time to know if we have an error in the template, but really have it right when we cut the template.
So the thing that Miško demoed yesterday on stage is, it's taken a long time to get there, but it's to the point now that it's like it's in a package, right? And I had it running on my laptop the other day, and so that's very, very close. Like, I don't think we're talking months. Would you? Oh, the thing was the linting in templates, or effectively template type checking and these sorts of things, right? It's functional now, and now it's a question of Chuck kind of tying up all the loose ends and just doing bug fixing and stuff like that. But I think that that's very, very close, as opposed to being months and months away. Soon, as I always say.
So that helps you in your editor to see the mistake early, but the other thing we want is for build tools that have a watch mode or an interactive mode to be able to do like a 1 second turnaround, so that even if your editor doesn't have the plugin or you missed it in the editor. I think we're going to try to make that work in Webpack first. And once we have the right pieces in place, once NGC is able to be more, to have a better interactive turnaround, then I hope other build tools will add their plugins for that as well.
Hello. I have a question about caching. In RC4, we added the timestamp query param so that we wouldn't cache the templates and the JS files, and we are using Angular CLI. And now that I think it was view factor or something, we had the option to add whatever we want to template URL. Now we don't have that option, probably because of AOT. And my question is, how do we handle caching in production with Angular CLI? So that each time we change the template or something, we get the newest one for the client.
So in production, you would usually include your JavaScript file in your initial HTML page somehow, right? So you have your page, and it includes the bundled example. And the recommendation that I see most people give is include a JavaScript file, the original JavaScript file of everything, and append the question mark and then the hash code of the JavaScript file. So that the initial JavaScript load always is not cached, right? And then with AOT, the whole template caching question should go away because the templates are included in the JavaScript. So if you bundle the JavaScript using Webpack, for example, or any of these other tools, then everything is one cohesive bundle, and you should not have the caching problem at all. What is a bit tricky is if you do lazy loading, you have to make sure that the individually lazily loaded parts of your application are consistent, right? So if your user loads like version 4 of this part and version 18 of the other part, then you're going to get a very colorful explosion, I think. So that has to be taken into account.
And also the CLI, when you build a prod build, you actually get an hash of the content, so that it's gonna, I don't know if it's timestamp or something, but you get some cache busting. Yeah, you get some cache busting value in the file name, and if you lazy load, if you separate the bundle, all of them will get a hashtag. If you don't use AOT, I mean, the templates are included inside. They are inlined into your decorators. I mean, if you use AOT, well, the JavaScript is part of the bundle. So with the CLI, there's no problem as long as you do a prod build. Dev builds don't have cache busting like that. They use something else. I think they use the question mark trick.
Hi everyone. I have a question about the tutorials online. You are using System.js, and I think most of us were using Angular CLI. And in the CLI, they use Webpack. And every time we try to search something on the tutorial online, it's something about TSC and System.js and etc. But when we develop, we find Webpack and Angular CLI.
So part of this is that the reason that we use System.js in the docs is that obviously the docs are running in the browser, right? So we have no facility to run Webpack or any other tool. So really System.js is the only way we can do it in the documentation. It's important to note as well that really these are two separate processes, right? There's the TypeScript compilation and ahead of time compilation, and then the bundling, building, loading, or whatever, two distinct pieces. We sort of merge them together inside of Webpack, inside of the CLI, right? And it should be said as well that we're not kind of favoring one over the other, and I think that System.js is good for some cases, and Webpack is good for others, but it's the only way we can do it for the documentation so that people can really try it out without installing Webpack and a bunch of build tools and downloading all this stuff. And so in general, most kind of instructions should port between them, right? Unless there is something specific to that piece of documentation, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hello, I have a question for everyone. It's also related to documentation. Are there any plans to maybe publish some more detailed documentation about the whole Angular structure, so it will be easier for developers to actually contribute to the framework? Because currently I know it's split in modules, but we don't have any big insights of what the framework is actually doing in details. And if you go through the code, it's kind of hard where to start from and all of that. Thanks.
So that's definitely something we've talked to the documentation team about. Most of the docs are very much about how do you do this thing, and I definitely agree with you that we need to have how does this thing work so that you can extend on it, build on top of it, build your own plugins. So absolutely yes. That's been sort of pushed aside as we've been getting to 2.0 and things have been changing, right? And now that those APIs are more or less stable and solid, I think that's something we're certainly going to attack. And if it's something that you understand out there, or if it's something that you want to help contribute to, then we'd absolutely love to have contributions to the docs. And ditto for localization as well. We've started an effort to do the Angular documentation in Chinese, a couple of other languages. So if that's something you're interested in helping in, then please do let us know, and we'd love to help you have us localize the docs.
All right. Anyone else here?
My question is about Dart version of Angular. So what is the workflow? So is it kind of has priority against TypeScript version, or? I mean,
So would you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, my question is about Angular Dart version. So yeah, so recently it was announced that it kind of has separate wrapper, and yeah, how it's synchronized, and is it has more priorities than TypeScript version, or like that?
Right. So originally, Angular, we had the same code base for both TypeScript and Dart, and that placed constraints on both the TypeScript, the TypeScript version as well as the Dart version. So we couldn't do certain things, optimizations, etc. So especially Dart team felt that they could if we would have split the code base, then they could do certain optimizations better on their side, and vice versa, we could do certain ones on our side. So they decided to take over the project. So right now, the Angular 2 Dart version is maintained by them, whereas we are fully focused on the TypeScript version of Angular. So we do talk to them to kind of make sure that the feature sets are in sync, but most of the new features are actually going to TypeScript.
So this is more of a CSS question. There seems to have been a lot of yeah, CSS for Angular 2. I mean, there seems to have been a lot of work that has been done for the CSS frameworks, trying to make them compatible for Angular 2. But there are still, I mean, for Bootstrap 4 and also for Angular Material, there are still certain features which are missing still. So my question to you guys is, which CSS framework do you think is the furthest right now for Angular 2?
Of the ones I've seen, I think Material and NG Bootstrap probably. One of the interesting things that I think the NG Bootstrap team especially has found has been that they need a lot less Angular to accomplish the stuff they want, right? Like, you can just write the CSS into the classes, or CSS into the components. I don't think everything has to be turned into an Angular component so much anymore. So I think probably those two are sort of the most ahead, but in general, like, you should just try and see how much effort it takes to, write. Like, you could write an Angular, Bootstrap tabs implementation, a simple one for your case, very, very rapidly, right? The thing that these larger projects have to do is kind of cover every single use case they could possibly imagine, right? And so it's something that you don't always have to wait for the third party to implement it if it's something for your end user app, right? Like, building it into an app is a very different thing than building a reusable third party for everybody, right? So and it just comes down to style, basically.
Two things to keep in mind. Angular 2 has Zone.js, which abstracts away having to tap into the framework to tell it to do things when a third-party plugin finishes a task. So that automatically decouples the CSS code, CSS frameworks from Angular as well. And we do have a CSS parser that we are implementing into the compilation pipeline in Angular 2. And as we do that, we'll discover to see what kind of CSS primitives we can expose into the framework. And that will allow us to have better plugins for animation and better plugins for layout in the future.
So actually I've got two questions, a small one and a big one. The small one is, I guess, rather simple to answer. So for the Angular CLI, are there any plans to expose the Webpack config? Because I've seen right now it's embedded in the Node modules. Or are there some mechanisms to merge our own config?
That would ask on
We love our handcrafted Webpack configs.
So you would be surprised that this question is asked quite a lot, actually.
All the time.
This is not the first time I hear it.
It would be easy to answer.
And well, the answer is still the same. We don't have any plans to expose a Webpack config currently. What will happen is that we are working on an add-on system that will allow add-ons to touch the config and change it directly.
And it should be said that this is not because we're being difficult or because we don't want to do it or because we're control freaks or anything like that, right? The problem is that what we are absolutely trying to avoid is that if 6 months from now there is a better JavaScript build tool, right? And there will be a better JavaScript build tool because this is JavaScript and it changes every 7 hours. So there will be a new tool. Mm-hmm. And the problem is if we give you access to something as specific as the Webpack configuration, if we then decide we want to switch to some other tool, you're left high and dry, right? Like, you are stuck because we're no longer able to depend on that Webpack configuration. And that's really, I think, the reason we're not doing it, right? Because the fact that we're using Webpack inside of the CLI is an implementation detail as far as we're concerned, right?
I mean, the Camera config is also exposed, stuff like that, so.
Right, but even still, right, if we go to Rollup next month, and I'm not saying we're going to do that, right, but if we were going to do that, then everything you put, all these little custom stuff you put into your custom Webpack config, right, is no longer worthwhile. And then your build breaks, and that's very much what we're trying to avoid. The other thing is that if you really want to get your hands on the Webpack stuff, right, if it's something you really, really want to do, then I think we're trying as wherever possible that if we're going to write a plugin like the AOT compiler plugin for Webpack, right, we're going to use it inside of the CLI. We're also going to be able to, that's available to use in your own Webpack build. So if you really feel like you really have to do it, then you can generate a CLI project, use all the generators, the infrastructure, and just run your own Webpack build inside of that. And that's a totally legitimate and fine thing to do. Fair?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Is for people who understand and know Webpack well enough, they can actually use their own Webpack config, and we don't obfuscate it. It's easy to find in the CLI, and it's easy to copy over. For people who don't understand Webpack and don't want to understand Webpack, then exposing it would confuse users and would make it more complex for them. And add-ons will make it like simpler. Well, where you have like an intention of like I want to use this feature. And changing the config is the way to do that, but users should work with that kind of intent.
I think I can totally see your point. You did it with the proxy because that's exposing the Webpack stuff to us to swap out the implementation. So I can see the rationale. So thank you. And I guess the other questions might also be a question you got asked quite a lot. So, but I got it also asked quite a lot by my clients. So the question would be, what are the long-term goals of your roadmap? So because Angular 2 was like a major rewrite, and so my question would be, how would future major versions relate to like Angular 2? So will they build upon the foundation of Angular 2, or I mean, honestly you can't predict the future, but maybe I don't know, give some directions.
So I think that first of all, I don't think anybody on this team ever wants to rewrite a framework from scratch again, ever. Like, we're not doing that.
I thought we were going to rewrite every Friday, right?
Yeah.
Yes, rewrite every Friday. That's the goal.
So if you haven't heard that, our version policy going forward is that we're on Semver, and so we will do, weekly patches, monthly minors, 6 monthly majors. Those 6 monthly majors, absolutely wherever possible, will not break the previous, right? So we'll have a deprecation policy. And that's so that we can strike a nice balance, hopefully, between stability on the framework, so you can build your stuff on top of it, right? But as I just said, the web platform moves very quickly, right? There's new APIs coming. And so the whole idea of all of this code gen stuff that we've been talking about, all this metadata, all this stuff we've been talking about, is that we want you to be able to write Angular applications, right? That's what you should be able to write. And then it's our job to make the framework play in whatever environment comes next, right? So if there's some new amazing web API that makes it 10 times faster to update the DOM, right? We should let you opt into that for free, right? You shouldn't have to rewrite your code to deal with that. And that's, I think, the long-term plan of what Angular as a platform is about, is to just let you write applications, write them once, right? And then we'll deal with all of the host environment, all the stuff that you shouldn't have to deal with as a developer.
We're also that's something that we're also working on tools based on TS-Lint and other tools that will automatically upgrade your code. So if you have a new Angular version and like a method call got renamed or something got moved around, we hope to have automatic fixers that automatically adjust your code base to work with the newer version of Angular. And so we both expect fewer changes to happen and the changes to be smaller, but also we will build tooling to allow you to migrate your application more easily.
So let me add a couple of things to it. Since we've done it once, the question is, why won't we not do it again, right? And I want to answer the question why this particular transition from 1 to 2 was special. And the reason is that we knew with Angular 1 two things. First of all, we knew that the performance could be improved, and we also knew that toolability could be improved. But we understood that in order to do that, we had to do breaking changes, right? Like fundamentally, you look at the stuff and you go like, yeah, if you can't reason about a template, which one is an expression and which one isn't, and when you rely on DOM, and there's certain things that just cannot be done with the current system. And so this is the reason why the decision was made to kind of do a kind of fresh start. Given that, I think we achieved that goal pretty well. Like, we are very toolable. The performance tests we have show us that we are very, very close to the ideal ideal speed of the browser, like if you kind of hand code it. The tooling story we have is, I think, pretty good. So what I'm missing is like the reason why one would decide to rewrite again, like other than like let's just change the API for the sake of it, which like we don't want to do. Like you have to have some underlying reason that drives you in this particular direction. I mean, granted, like if everything that you do again, you probably come up with better names and there's learnings to be had, right? Like, but does this learning justify the humongous cost associated with it, right? And so I don't see areas where we could like have such a huge impact where we could get like 10x speed improvement or 10x productivity for the developer because the tooling is available and types, right? All of these things have been done, and so at this point, what's left is just incremental stuff. And given that we are I would say in a very good position because so much of the framework is so declarative that we have actually a tremendous amount of leeway in terms of the underlying code generation and what we do, that we don't have to, we can change all of these things from underneath you without you ever noticing. So I'm really kind of excited in both in how we ended up here, but also I just don't see it likely that we would be forced again in the position where these things would have to be rethought from ground up again. So this is a long answer to say like this is a one-off. It was a special case.
Yeah, we struck the right balance of.
So, question about the wonderful CLI. It's still in beta, so we've learned the hard way that means it could be a rocky ride. What do we need to keep in mind as we're using this? Because there's betas fairly frequently. Do we need to foresee like reinstalling a fresh app each time you produce a beta, or do we just install it and go? I mean, what are the rules of the road for using it?
So you're talking about like System.js to Webpack transition was a big one, right?
Now that we're past.
Now that we're past that, no, I think the CLI is pretty much where I want it to be, feature-wise, to be final, 1.0 final. And after that, we'll follow Semver. We'll try to keep it from breaking changes, and that's like really a good question about like what is a breaking change for a CLI. But one of the goals is that with the upgrade and the refactoring tools, we will definitely have upgrades for the CLI itself. So when you move from one version of the CLI to the next, you have like an automatic script that you can run that help you and hold your hand to get to the next version without having to rebuild everything from scratch, because that was an experience, and we did it like, we tried to do it in the best way possible, but we understand the frustration that you saw, and we definitely don't want to do that again. So my answer to like how we're gonna avoid having that in the future will be to have like an actual tool that helps you and refactor your code, if there is any refactor to be done. Because at the end, we want you to build like Angular app, and Angular CLI and Angular itself should be separated. So really, that should not happen often.
The only thing I would add to that is that from your code's point of view, you should be cautious to not do things that are, again, Webpack specific, right? If you're doing things that are not idiomatic ES6 TypeScript JavaScript, right, those are the things that would bite you. So in general, if you're sticking with the rules of the road and you're writing ES or TypeScript, right, you're not throwing like if this require this, like that's where it gets tricky, right? So if you just stick to regular TypeScript, then we can evolve the CLI under you, right? That's the best bit of advice I can give you on that.
Kind of related to that as well is as new versions of TypeScript come out with new language features like async await, non-nullable types, things like that, how do you plan to absorb those language features? And how do I, as an application developer, avoid the breaking changes as the platform, the Angular? I want to upgrade Angular, but maybe I can't upgrade my TypeScript instance or my tools. What's the plan for somebody along those lines? I mean, what I'm suggesting is, does it mean that we will now see Angular version locked to TypeScript versions, and as they will rev together in some respects?
So Angular 2 supports TypeScript 1.8, so that means that since we're Semver, we can't force you onto TypeScript 2.0 until Angular 3. When Angular 3 comes out, it will, I'm sure, depend on TypeScript 2.1 or whichever version is out at the time. We already take care in like the DTS files that we publish to avoid any language features leaking out that don't work with an older version of TypeScript.
But make a point that like it does work with the newer version. Just because Angular is 1.8 doesn't mean that the developers can't use 2.0.
Right, so you can use TypeScript 2.0 as well if you want. It's just a matter of your decision and your choice.
I think the other part of the question is about like adding flags, right?
And just and philosophically, I get asked this question a lot when I'm out at companies, right? Very similar question. And I think that one of the goals we'd really like to avoid is you ever being stuck on an old version of Angular, right? This whole Semver incremental strategy, right, is that we would like you, where possible, like we do at Google, to stick as close to the front as possible, right? As close to the latest version of Angular. And so in kind of previous in Angular 1, that became a much larger thing to have to do to go from 1.3 to 1.4 to 1.5, right? And we would like to encourage everybody, wherever possible, to stick as close to head as possible, or close to the, the latest release as possible. Because then we have that certain level of flexibility on Semver, right? Where you're not going to get left behind. And that's what we'd like to avoid where possible.
Maybe for specific compiler flags, if you...
Just to follow up quickly. Yeah. So does that mean we won't see async await and non-nullable types in the Angular code base for quite a while?
So the Angular code base is kind of separate from your code base, right? The Angular code base is compiled separately, and so what flags we use are kind of our problem, and your flags are...
Just meaning the public APIs.
So yes, for the public APIs, until we go to TypeScript, so Angular 3 with TypeScript 2.1, which is in... When is that going to happen? Soonish? Anyway, so before that, we're not going to see async await or non-nullable. But actually, nullability is an interesting case because you will not see or null annotations in the d.ts files of Angular, just because that we don't have non-nullability in our d.ts files. But we don't actually have any APIs that I'm aware of that take null values intentionally. So if you just enable strict null checks in your code base, it will just work. So
we've proven that already because internally at Google we run all of our code with strict null checks turned on, including on the CodeGen, the ng factory files. So we have the same problem as any other Angular user, and we want to be able to opt into to new flags as they're added to TypeScript. So for example, with no implicit any, we had to do some work to make sure that you can compile with no implicit any, but when a new TypeScript version comes out that has new flags, we may not be able to support those flags until the next major release of Angular.
Okay, let me just add one more thing, which is that async await you can use today. And async await is something you do inside your function. It's not something that will ever leak to the public surface area of Angular.
Hi again.
Actually, I should add one more thing I forgot to add. The reason that we can use strict null checks internally is that we effectively use the no lib check flag to TypeScript, which says don't type check the DTS files. So if it finds things inside of the Angular DTS files, it doesn't matter if those type check or not. And you can use that flag also so that the DTS files that you receive from Angular or any other third-party library do not have to conform with the flags that you turn on for your own code.
Hi. So modular application, lazy loading JavaScript, lazy loading CSS. When you were looking at the styling support for components, was white labeling ever considered or discussed when you were looking at existing projects? So the ability to use a different CSS file at runtime. So you don't only have the one, you might have, say, for example, a dictionary of 4 alternate CSS files. But at runtime, you want to pick one.
Right. So the tricky part here is that Angular has the CSS gets the what's the word I'm looking for? Shimped for the purposes of narrowing it to the component, right? So if the component says I am declaring all my anchors blue, it doesn't leak outside of the component itself, right? So what we need to do is we need to take the CSS file and kind of munge it. And if you wanted to flip this at runtime, that means that the munger or the compiler has to be available at runtime, which kind of breaks security policies and a bunch of other things. So that's the reasoning why this particular thing is not there. Now you can't say that my components are not bound to do to constrain the CSS file to just two components that are globally available, with all the problems that come with that, and then you can do whatever you want.
And so I'm actually working with a fairly big enterprise at the moment who have this thing where they want to build the same code base, right? And effectively build the same app into basically two entirely different flavors of that app for two entirely different segments of their company, right? And so I think in general Angular 2 is going to be much more static, right, than an Angular 1 was. And I think that this kind of thing, like we were doing I18N, right, is something you'd want to do at build time rather than trying to do that dynamically at runtime. And I think that we will quite quickly see infrastructure come up, probably not from us, but from the open source community for things like that, for saying, okay, I want to build 12 different languages, and then I want to build the A version and the B version of this, rather than trying to do all this dynamically at runtime, which I think is always going to be faster and smaller and more performant.
You can also take a look at the material design project, Material Components 2. They have a theming system that is essentially what you're asking for, right? That users of your code can actually have different background colors and whatever. And if you take a look at how they solve that problem, that might be useful for you.
Hi everyone. The question is about component extension. Is there any plan to develop a mechanism to extend meta, and why it was not previewed in the early stages?
You mean like inheritance of the components? Yeah. Okay, so this question also comes up a lot, and the problem is that when you extend the component, it is not clear what set of rules does the metadata follow. So for example, if I extend the component and override the template, like, do I mean to concatenate it or like replace it? Like in the case of a template, you want to replace, but in other cases like input properties, you want to concatenate. And so what you end up with are these really complicated set of rules, like, oh, for this property it follows this rules, and for that property it follows this other set of rules, and it's just a headache and it's hard to explain to people. So for now, we simply said, if you want to extend, that's fine, you just have to replicate all of your annotations over. In the future, we might come up with some new way of doing it, but like we didn't want to accidentally step into some situation which would then provide us if we have to keep backwards compatibility and restrain us what we can do in the future. So we're just simply saying you can extend, but you have to copy the annotation over and deal with that stuff yourself.
There's no plan until now.
It might be in the future, but like it's not a simple answer, and because it's not a simple answer, like it's not something that you're just going to jump into and do it.
Hi, I have a question about the CLI. Is there any plan to add support for an auto-formatting feature? I'm not talking about any linter, I'm really talking about a zero-option auto-formatting tool. I think it could be useful to avoid endless code style debates.
Yes, I would love that personally. It's been a requested feature. We added at some point, we removed it for, so the CLI tries to follow the style guide, the official style guide of Angular 2. And we want the formatter to at least support all the rulings necessary to make that happen, and maybe like allow you to specify some specific formatting options. And I would say like this is definitely something that we want. Probably not something that will make it into final because the style guide is not finished anyway. Like they're still planning out everything. But yeah, this is something that we're interested. But if you're looking for a formatter right now, Clang is a really good one.
So there are two formatters that I'm aware of for TypeScript code, or TypeScript and ES6 code, I should say. There's the one that is built into TypeScript, which is, I would call more of an indenter, so it like indents your code correctly, but it doesn't, like, if a line is over long, it will not break it. And so if you're looking for something that like completely formats your code, including line breaks and all this kind of stuff, Clang format should work for you. So you just npm install Clang format, and it's just a binary you run on your code. We also have a gulp package, and I think there's also some grunt integration somewhere.
And if you want to build a Webpack like Clang formatter, that would be cool, and we'd probably put it into CLI. If there's a Webpack plugin to do it, we would do it. I don't know.
Just saying.
But it seems like a weird thing to put the Webpack really.
I don't know.
It's not a Webpack thing,
as
right?
As part of our tooling, we could do it. But anyway.
Everything should be Webpack.
Yeah, just do everything in Webpack.
Yeah, we should revert actually.
Everything.
We should put
Yeah,
the CLI inside.
So we should have pack web, where like you unpack your application from the website and format it as it comes.
Yes.
Okay, just want to say there's two things I find really exciting about Angular. One is it's typed, and second is we can use RxJS. It's really awesome. And since RxJS is, or at least the observables are such a fundamental concept, I think I was just wondering if you're considered to somehow include that into the compiler of TypeScript at some point in the future.
So one of the sort of tenets, we actually have a page on our wiki of goals and non-goals. And one of the non-goals is not to add any special runtime polyfills or anything like that. Now, as far as observable goes, that is actually something that is on the standards track right now that's being discussed in the ECMAScript committee. And so if that does go through, that will be part of libdts at some point, right? But we don't typically just incorporate any sort of runtime polyfills. So for instance, we don't necessarily include promise. We defer to other polyfill packages that you can choose to your liking if you so please. So the short answer to that is no. But yeah, we try to make it as easy as possible to do that for your own uses.
Hi guys, thank you for all the nice content, and Alex, thank you for another build to add it to my chain I have to check out. I like Bazel, I think, I'm afraid. I have this question. I have a lot of products that are going to target modern browsers, so I would like to have an Angular version that compiles down to ES 2015 instead of to ES5, because that's just a waste of browser stuff and supporting all the things I don't need to support. I understand Anglers need to support it, but I don't need to support it for a lot of my products. So I rather would target ES 2015 instead of ES 2005, ES5.
So this is hard because really the sticky point here right now is NPM, right? Because most tooling is not set up in such a way that it's going to, like NPM doesn't really understand ES6, right? So it's hard for us to distribute an ES6 build out to NPM that you could pull down. I think we used to ship a subdirectory of ES6, and I think that we could probably opt back into doing that at some point, maybe. We're already doing ES module build with ES5 code, so that's what we're using for tree shaking and sort of assembling with Webpack. So I guess it's something we could do. It's not something we've really talked about much because there hasn't been much demand for it. And from what we've found so far, generally, actually the ES6 builds tend to be slower at the moment. So a pure ES6 Angular 2 application is actually slower than a ES5 Angular application. And so I think when that becomes faster, we might. But
everybody stays on ES5, ES 2015 don't have that fast.
Well, I think the V8 team and so the various virtual machine vendors are looking into that quite closely. So they know that it's on their plate, they have to do it. The other thing that I would like to add is that we kind of oversee this for internal applications, Google too, so we kind of like define what version of JavaScript you should be targeting. And we built a whole tool chain that does transpilation and that lowers your TypeScript code into ES5 for development and then also for production. It turns out, yes, so we have many browsers now support classes and destructuring in many cases. Like that is getting better, but now we have the new wave of features arriving, async await and generators, and we see a long foreseeable future in which the language standard and the tooling is going to move faster than the browser implementations. And then also you get into the issue of destructuring was a good example where Firefox just had a bug in their implementation of destructuring, or maybe it was Chrome. So some browsers might not have exactly correct implementations. So it's much easier to target one correct transpiler than many browsers that are in like various states. So what I see for the foreseeable future, we will continue to be transpiling for like years.
Yeah, but you can transpile down to ES 2015.
And so the follow-up is you could start like raising the bar, right? You could lower down to ES 2015 instead of ES 5, and then you could move to ES 2016 as the bar. And I think that's definitely something we should look into, and the whole ecosystem should look into. But I think we're not quite there yet. So it will still take a bit.
But you can do this with your application, right? Like Angular could be ES5, but you don't have to, right? Like your Angular could be, it's backwards compatible. So Angular could always be ES5. I'm not saying it will be, but let's say it is. Your application, you can compile down to 2015, and then if you have a browser that reads it, then the browser will run your code as 2015 and run Angular framework code as ES5. Like that, there's not a problem with that.
No, just feels.
And of course, you
it's
could
code at the end of the day. Like
yourself.
it's the browser that feels weird and icky about it, not you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.